Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the president's economic agenda is once again in the spotlight, with less than 4 months until the midterms, as his administration announces new tariffs on dozens of countries, while the war with Iran rages on, driving up energy costs and threatening global shipping traffic. The military conflict between the U.S. and Iran continues to escalate, with the U.S. launching more attacks on Iran, making it 13 straight days of military strikes. And President Trump telling Axios he's weighing a, quote, massive attack, although we should note he's threatened major attacks before. Moments ago, President Trump was asked about that potential escalation and whether there is, in fact, an off-ramp. Here's how he answered.
About Iran, what is the exit strategy?
Well, I think there's a lot of them. There's a military exit where we just keep going just the way we are, and we can even make it a heavier dose, and it's knocking out everything they have. Or there's a smarter strategy, and that's you make a deal, and they want to make a deal. I just don't think they're ready yet, but they do want to make a deal. You know, we're prepared to do that, as you know. We're locked and loaded. We're locked and loaded and ready to go, but we're talking to them, so I think while we're talking, we'll see what comes of it. I think they're being serious. I think they are being by far the most serious that we've seen them, but that doesn't mean we get there. We'll see what happens.
Iran also not backing down, launching retaliatory strikes on U.S. allies in the Gulf region overnight. Tehran doubling down on its strategy to disrupt waterways vital for global commerce in both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. The country's foreign minister posting on social media, quote, the mindless aggression they, referring to officials in the Trump administration, advocate will only ensure that POTUS pays a heavier price for a deadline he's trying to achieve. The price of gas continues to climb, the average cost per gallon hitting $4.11 today, the highest it's been in 6 weeks. Some Republican senators on Capitol Hill trying to grapple with the rising costs while maintaining their support for the president.
Oil is very, very high in Missouri. Yesterday, the average gas price was $3.78. Diesel is much higher than that. Those are very high prices. I mean, obviously, the president shares those concerns. So I think we need to draw this to a close. We need to get both straits, the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, open. And we've got to get energy prices down.
If they get a nuclear weapon, there's no place in this country that's safe. This president said that's not going to happen under his watch. Now, does anybody want to go to war? Nobody wants to go to war. Does anybody want to have high gas prices? Nobody wants high gas prices, but nobody wants to be killed by a nuclear weapon.
What I'm seeing from people is they are concerned about energy prices, and we get it. But I'm also seeing a lot of support for the need to address Iran, make sure they don't have a nuclear weapon, and that they can't continue to be the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world. And so it is tougher right now in terms of prices at the pump.
All this coming as the U.S. Trade Representative announced a new wave of tariffs on 60 countries that are now in effect, including on some of America's closest trading partners. It comes after the Supreme Court, of course, struck down most of the president's tariffs earlier this year that were imposed under an Emergency Powers Act. The administration using a different legal authority, this time citing concerns about forced labor. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Monica, let me start with you. What were your key takeaways from what we heard in the Oval Office? The president saying that he is locked and loaded and ready to go.
Which is something we have heard repeatedly throughout this now months-long conflict, Kristen, but certainly with a sense of urgency here because of the president's own words about the fact that it's possible he could launch a massive attack on Iran that the U.S. has not launched before. According to him, those were his own comments to Axios. And today he was asked whether he has made a decision on whether he's going to go forward with that, whether he will or won't. And he said that he hasn't made that decision yet, that he's going to continue to evaluate that and that he could go in that direction or he could still go in some kind of a negotiated diplomatic direction in what he would call a smaller route, a smaller path instead of the big, potentially, quote, massive attack here. But But he was also asked pretty pointedly whether these threats that he's been making against bridges, against power plants and infrastructure would constitute a war crime. And he said that he didn't want to address that. He didn't want to answer that specifically, which also stood out to me because those are the threats he's making on social media every day that he's saying he could potentially be going to next, while still arguing that top members of his administration, his vice president, his secretary of state, and some of his other key aides are still in some negotiations behind the scenes through mediators, though we haven't really seen any progress on that front in recent days, Kristen.
You know, Monica, earlier this week, Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed during a Senate hearing that Russia and China, he said, were in fact aiding Iran in this war. What more are your sources telling you about that?
Yeah, and specifically, he said that they were enabling that. And when the president was asked about that today, he said, no, I'm not so sure whether China or Russia are enabling that. In fact, he said he trusts President Putin and President Xi, and that he doesn't believe that they are willingly helping Iran, even though he conceded that certainly weapons could get into the wrong hands, could be sold to Iran. And he said nothing major is coming from either of those two countries. Maybe there are some minor things. And of course, that is what critics have seized on, because it does appear, according to our own reporting, that that is a major area of concern if that is the kind of help potentially that Iran is getting that specifically is damaging to the United States and to U.S. service members. Those critics say that that should be something that the U.S. is more worried about and speaking out against more forcefully. Kristen.
And Monica, just finally, I want to put up a recent Fox News poll out this week, which breaks down people's disapproval of this war by category. Overall, 73%, Monica, of respondents say they disapprove of the president's handling of the war with Iran. That's 96% of Democrats. Republicans at 43%. Independents, critical, of course, in the midterms and any election cycle, at 83%. Are these numbers having any type of an impact on the president and his thinking? We know publicly he said that they aren't.
Yeah, exactly. I think the president is maybe one of the only people saying that publicly. Privately, you do have White House officials very cognizant of where this could continue to head, since those numbers have been trending in the wrong direction for the White House only as this conflict goes on. And since there doesn't seem to be an immediate exit strategy here, as the president was asked today, that does continue to be a topic of concern for them, and one that they would admit they're watching very carefully, because, of course, you just get closer and closer to the midterm elections now that we are about 100 days out from them. That is something that they are watching closely, but it's the president who leads on that messaging, and he's the one saying he's not worried about it. In fact, he's pretty dismissive of it whenever he is asked.
Yeah,
Kristen.
one administration official telling me he remains steadfast. All right, Monica, Alba, thank you so much for starting us off. Really appreciate it. Brian Cheung, let me turn to you. Let's talk about those tariffs that were announced overnight. What are the implications, particularly given the fact that they are hitting a number of the United States' closest trading partners?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of deja vu from the Rose Garden announcement last April, but this new round of tariffs is a little bit different. I'll walk you through the changes here. First off, the rates are significantly lower, and it's kind of a blanket tariff, 10 to 12.5% on 60 trade partners. That includes our big partners to the north and south, like Canada and Mexico. It also covers the United Kingdom and the European Union. And this is being done under what they call Section 301, which is a law in which the U.S. can kind of levy these tariffs if there's concerns about forced labor. Now, I should point out there's a lawsuit from the Liberty Justice Center that is arguing that this is not really a part of the remit for that law, and that there wasn't a clear link between the need for these tariffs and the condition of forced labor, which the SJC does say is an actual issue. And now I should point out, when we talk about the countries that are being impacted by this, it's different because under the Rose Garden announcement that I referenced at the top here, that was, of course, overturned by SCOTUS earlier this year. There were these industry-specific tariffs like steel and aluminum that are active. They're still in place. They were imposed last year. There has not been any sort of legal strike down of that. There was a global 10% that the president put in under Section 122 after the Supreme Court struck this down. And now here we are with these Section 301 tariffs that the president put into effect to make sure that that lapse didn't happen, where the tariffs dropped and then had to be stood back up again. So again, the president has had to turn to many legal avenues to try to keep these tariffs in place because of these legal challenges. And now there's another one. Who knows how long this will stay? But at least for right now, 10 to 12.5%. Those are the tariffs that we're looking at right now, Kristen.
Well, and I see on your list, Brian, Brazil, Canada, new tariffs announced against those countries this week as well. What are the implications? What does it signal about the overall tariff strategy?
Yeah, let's zoom in on both of those countries because Brazil and Canada, these were kind of surprises based off of tariff experts that I've been speaking with this week. They were expecting those blanket tariffs on those 60 countries, but they didn't expect such a sharp vitriol against these specific trading partners. Brazil, 25% tariff on apparel, ethanol, wood products, farm machinery. Still exempt right now are some of these products that we would get at the grocery store, like beef and coffee. So you should not expect to see large impacts there. Canada, this is one that's being proposed under what is a novel way of trying to impose these tariffs. That's Section 338. Again, we'll see if that legally holds up as well. It doesn't begin until August 19th, but this would cover things like alcohol, dairy products, hockey sticks, very iconic to Canadian trade, cement as well. This would not include energy products, fish, critical minerals, potash, which is a major export into the United States, but 50%, Kristen. That is a huge amount and probably part of the negotiation tactic as they try to get USMCA redone.
Yeah, it certainly is. Do we have a sense at this point, Brian, just how much these tariffs are costing Americans?
Well, we have an estimate from the Yale Budget Lab. They say that this could cost Americans $1,100 annually at the current rate. That is a lot of money, especially when you consider gas prices are high right now, as you were just talking about with Monica. And also, don't forget, interest rates are also nudging higher. Bond yields are going higher. Mortgage rates are going higher because of expectations that the Fed is going to have to raise interest rates to tamp down on inflation. That means borrowing costs are more expensive as the prices at the pump are higher and as tariffs threaten to eat into your budget.
All right, Brian Cheung with all the economic angles. Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Courtney, Kube, let me turn to you here on set as always. So the United States now on day 13 of consecutive days of strikes against Iran. Is it your expectation, based on your conversations, that this tempo is going to continue? Is it going to escalate? What are you watching for?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue. We'll see the same sorts of targets that the U.S. military will go after. What's kind of notable, though, is we've not seen Iranian activity in the Strait of Hormuz for several days. So remember, the whole idea behind these military strikes is it's supposed to be in retaliation for Iranian activity in the Strait of Hormuz, going after commercial shipping and trying to degrade their ability to do so. So the real question is, how much longer does this have to go? It appears that it is having an impact on Iran's ability to go after ships on a daily basis already.
You know, it's interesting. When I interviewed President Trump several weeks ago, I asked him about the force posture, the troop posture in the region. He signaled they were not going to scale it back. What does it currently look like? Do you have a sense that more troops are going to be sent in?
So there's replacement troops that are still going in. There has been no decrease in the U.S. military presence, even throughout the ceasefire. It's well over 50,000. Some of those troops were replaced. And then notably, during that ceasefire, the U.S. was able to sort of refill their stockpiles. So, I mean, they are, if in fact the president does want to really escalate this, they have what they need to keep doing so. Now, if it goes on for weeks or even months, that's when we start getting into the problems with the stockpiles that we've been talking about, the potential for both defensive munitions and then some of these longer range offensive systems.
And I have to ask you, there was a big back and forth. We, of course, had the horrific news that 4 U.S. service members were killed this week. You were there covering the dignified transfer ceremony, and now confusion about how those deaths are actually being counted. What can you tell us? What's the takeaway?
Yeah, this has been confusing from the beginning. So you'll remember that initially the 2 soldiers who were first identified as being killed in Jordan last week, they were listed as being killed in Operation Inherent Resolve, which is the counter-ISIS mission, despite the fact that President Trump himself said that they died trying to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. So they were initially put into this Pentagon database. It's called the Defense Casualty Assessment System, DCAS. It tracks all combat casualties, hostile and non-hostile, going back to World War I. They were initially listed under Operation Epic Fury. Then, and as recently as Wednesday, they were listed in there. It was 18 total deaths. Somewhere at some point yesterday, they were taken out. Now it's 14. I just checked it before I came on set, and it's still listed at 14. We keep asking the Pentagon what's going on here. Last night, they told us it was some sort of a data issue, and it was a temporary thing, but it's been about 24 hours, and it's still not fixed, and it's still not clear. I mean, this may seem bureaucratic to some of our viewers here, and in some ways it is, but it does have real-world implications for these individuals, for their families, when it comes to things as poignant and personal as what will be written on their headstone? The conflict that you were killed in is written on the headstone. And so candidly, Kristen, we don't really know what happened here. The Pentagon has completely stopped responding to our requests for what's happening.
Well, it's such important context, Court. I know you're going to continue to stay on top of us. Let us know if there's any update. We really appreciate your reporting. As always, Richard Engel, let me turn to you. What is the latest that your sources are telling you about the fact that there have now been 13 consecutive days of strikes from the United States against Iran? Is this escalating? Is this an inflection point, Richard?
I've been speaking to several senior Arab leaders today, people who are representatives, senior representatives of countries directly involved in this conflict, and I'm sensing frustration from them. They don't know where this is going. They don't see an off-ramp. They're not seeing diplomatic progress. They're frustrated with President Trump's near daily threats of escalation. They're frustrated that the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed, that there is now an issue and a potential closure of the Red Sea after the Houthis attacked those 2 Saudi ships. And they are worried about the future and their economies. You talked about the human cost that Americans are bearing, the 4 service members who were recently killed. Before that, the cost of this war that Americans are feeling at the pump. All across the region, they are bearing enormous economic costs. Investors are not going to the Gulf in the same way. Just because of the recent threats, the threats that President Trump made yesterday and then apparently backed off on a short while ago, flights across the region were canceled. Many airlines diverted flights. So there are real consequences. It is very difficult for people to plan their future. Expatriates who move to the Gulf for lifestyle, for tax reasons, for whatever reason, are changing their minds. They're leaving the countries like the UAE. So this war has been incredibly disruptive for the entire region. Just here in Israel, for example, yesterday the Israeli government authorized bomb shelters to be reopened in several cities to prepare the public for a possible escalation. That sends a message to the public that perhaps things are ramping up again. So there are real costs, and there is this feeling of a potential war that doesn't have a clear end game. I spoke to one of these senior Arab officials, and he said that it gets crazier every day, and that they have no idea where this is going. So not a great sense of optimism for a war that many in the Middle East, many in Israel, many in the Arab Gulf states thought would be quick, thought would have a succeeded regime change in Iran, which is proving to be much more costly, much more unpredictable, and much longer than they anticipated.
Well, Richard, to that very point, President Trump has consistently said the Iranians are desperate to make a deal. They want to make a deal. And then this week, he changed his language around that and started to say, actually, they don't want to make a deal. What is the gut check that you are getting from your conversations? And are we basically witnessing Iran waiting out this political cycle, Richard?
It's also what are the stakes? So a deal, yes, Iran certainly does want to make a deal, but Iran wants to make a deal in which it has a degree of control, if not total control, of the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that the United States and many countries, by the way, have said is totally unacceptable. It would be a violation of the law of the sea. It would change the status of what was an open and international waterway. But Iran also has much more to lose. This is a war that was launched by the United States and Israel. Iran didn't start this war, and it was launched with the idea of regime change. President Trump said that he was going to destroy the Iranian civilization. There's been numerous threats made against Iran. The supreme leader of the country was assassinated. So in many ways, Iran is fighting for its survival. And when you are fighting for your survival, when you're backed in a corner, it is not a war of choice. When you are fighting a war of choice, your tolerance for pain, your tolerance for suffering is very different. So I think they're looking at this. The two sides are looking at this from very different perspectives. The Iranians believe if they stop fighting, they could lose power, they could lose their lives, the military could be dissolved. Whereas I think the Gulf states thought this would be, and Israel and the United States thought this would be a quick and easy war, and it's proven not to be. But they don't have as much to risk at stake. They're not risking nearly as much.
Well, it's really important insight and reporting. Richard Engel, as always, in Jerusalem. Please continue to stay safe. Richard, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is retired Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, former commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, now a distinguished military fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Vice Admiral. We really appreciate it.
That's good to be with you again.
Well, it's wonderful to have you to help us understand this incredibly complex moment in which the United States finds itself, as we've been reporting, 13 consecutive days now of strikes against Iran. What do you make of this moment?
Hey, Kristen, you had a great word that you used. You said inflection point a little bit ago, and I want to key on that because I try to make my assessments and analyze this by looking at what's happening as opposed to what's being said, right? There's a lot being said on both sides, and part of that is posturing. But what I see is that, the United States sent recently a deal over to the Iranians via Iraq, and it was outright rejected by the Iranians. So that's number one. The other thing I see is the U.S. has moved forces to the region, not just forces to replenish what was theirs, but additional forces to the region. And I see a frustration on the U.S. side that, these 13 days of attacks that we've done have been, as was discussed, in direct response to Iran attacking ships. And every time we retaliated because they attacked ships, they would go attack or try to attack again another ship. And I think that's getting this administration closer to that tipping point that you're talking about. And so that's what I see. I see this exactly what was just being discussed, that the two sides are looking at this in a different way. And for the Iranian side, it's not the Iranian people that are making the decision. It's the IRGC, which is very much a hard line, and they believe they can stay the course, and they don't care about the impacts on their people.
To that point, we've heard President Trump threaten to escalate even further, to start to hit civilian infrastructure. What do you think would prompt such a response? And is escalation the only way to bring this war to an end? Or do you think a negotiated settlement is possible at this point?
Well, interesting. The MOU has failed, right, Christine?
Yeah.
But it's failed in terms of a ceasefire. It's still allowed this path for negotiation, so that's still there. I believe the ultimate solution is diplomacy, but I do think that we're on a potential path to escalation for the reasons that I talked about before. So, that's how I see it. Yes, diplomacy is the answer here. Now, escalation, if it happens, expect it to be much higher intensity than what you're seeing, a much broader target set than what you've seen before, and expect it to be, more impactful in terms of more broader, something more along the lines what you saw when the conflict had Israel in it, although this one likely won't have Israel in it. But that doesn't mean it's going to drive the Iranians to a table for the reasons that I said before. Only time's going to tell if that can happen.
How do you think, if you were inside the administration, if you were advising the president right now, for example, what would your counsel be in terms of trying to lower the temperature and getting these two sides back to the negotiating table?
Christine, I think one of the key things that's important going forward for diplomacy to work is to involve more of the international community in this along the lines of this common denominator of free flow of commerce. Because we're seeing the Red Sea threatened, we're seeing the Straits of Hormuz threatened, and understand necessarily that those nations can't necessarily pitch in the kinetic side of the business potentially, but they certainly should be aligned to the common understanding that the impact on the global supply chain, on energy flow is a global problem. And we don't want to set a precedent that a non-nation state like the Houthis or a nation state like Iran can choke off these critical supply lines. So I think that's a key way to raise this up to an even higher level on the diplomatic side. Certainly, you don't want to back down on your threat to use forces. That has a deterrent value in and of itself that we're seeing. And you do have to degrade Iranians' capability to attack. If they're refusing to attack, you've got to blunt that in some way.
All right, Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, thank you so very much for your expertise, your insights. Please come back, join us again soon. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christine.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.